I worked at a convenience store. There is also a halfway house full of medicated/unstable/psycho people around the corner from where I live, so they often come into the store. I was 17 when this all happened. There was this one woman who from afar seemed normal, but up close something was off. Her makeup was a bit weird. She would wear bright red lipstick, sometimes yellow or bright pink, and always a bit messy. She always wore the same thing and walked around like she was slightly confused. I remember the first time she entered the store. She bought a 30-cent pack of gum, with a $10 bill. As I was giving her change, she stared at me in a very creepy way. She didn't blink. She complimented me, "You're so pretty and beautiful, I want to be like you," with an eerie grin. "Haha, thanks. Here is your change then," she said. "You know I have $1 million. I'm also going to marry Ryan Seacrest and we're going to live on a big house on the moon. I would tell you where I hid my $1 million, but I have the power to not tell you." She also said many more wacky things similar to this. Okay, and off she went. I figure, oh, it's just one of the schizophrenic people from around the corner, they never cause any harm. She began frequenting the store much more. She would enter with a silent smile, walk round the store without breaking eye contact, and leave in silence. Just went in just to stare. I told my friends about her and they agreed she was creepy as fug, so I started carrying around pepper spray just in case. Then she began to actively stalk. I would be walking my dog and she'd be staring at me from behind a car. I would be sitting on my balcony and she'd shout, "Hey Thought Factory! You look so pretty today." I would be walking down a store aisle and she would be behind a rack, giggling and whispering to herself. I'd turn around and she'd run away. I had it up to here. There were also a few other places where she ran into me. Why the fuck is she stalking me? The final straw was when she broke into my house a few days later, and I have webcam footage of this. I was ready to take a shower on night when I heard the front door open from all the way in my room. I heard a faint "oh, so this is Thought Factory's house." I freaked the fuck out. I turned my laptop webcam on for evidence in case anything went down and stood over by my phone. I was panicking. I ask, "What are you doing here?" and she asks, I wanted to see if you were in here. Do you have a phone I could borrow? Go use the one outside. I don't have enough money, it's only like 35 cents. I don't have 35 cents. Yeah, well, you can't be in here, so go. She turns around and I stand there watching her as she leaves. I hear some rustling by my door. I run over and I see her stuffing some of my family's dirty laundry clothes into her shirt. Leave that alone. That is not yours. She dumps it out with the quickness and runs out the door.
Yeah? What are you doing here?
I wanted to talk to you.
Why?
Why are you acting like that with me?
Oh, 'cause you just entered my home without permission.
No, I knocked on the door and the door just kind of opened and I was like, Savannah.
Oh, you're gonna have to, leave, please.
Why?
Because you're not allowed to enter.
Okay. Can I borrow your phone?
For what?
I need to call my friend. He's getting off work and I wanted to see if he'd pick me up.
Oh, you could use the phone outside.
Which one?
Payphone.
Payphones are 35 cents.
You could have asked for 35 cents somewhere.
When I was a senior in high school, I was stalked by a customer who would come into my work. He was a man in his 50s and I was a 17-year-old girl. It started off fine. He was a regular customer and a little bit odd, and my coworkers didn't care for him that much. I always tried to be nice though, and I guess this made him take a liking to me. At my workplace, one service we have is making copies. He would come into the store at least 4 days a week and request copies of writing he'd done to be made. This wouldn't be weird if he didn't only ask for 2 copies. One for himself, and one for me. If I was not working, he would leave a copy of his poetry or writing with a coworker to give to me. I thought it was sweet at first, and he was just trying to be nice and share his work with me, as I am quite fond of poetry. However, his behavior grew more advanced. He started to refuse service from anyone except me, and if I was not working, he would ask when I would be back and then leave. Over the course of a few weeks, he started getting stranger. He began bringing me in boxes of chocolates that he just happened to accidentally pick up too many of. This happened 4 or 5 times. My best friend happened to work at the same place as me, and one day when we were working together, we were casually discussing our weekend plans and what we should do. My stalker was in the store at this time, and I was making his copies as I talked to my friend. He was the only person in the store and he pretended he was browsing our merchandise, but he must have been listening in. The weekend comes around and my friend and I had planned to grab coffee together at this local cafe, which we had been discussing at work. We show up at the cafe, and lo and behold, who is there? My stalker. I chalked it up to a coincidence and said hello politely. He didn't appear to be drinking or eating anything, and had been sitting at a counter near the front door. I am pretty positive he was just waiting for me to show up. My friend and I ended up getting our coffee to go and leaving. We went across the street to a store and I watched from the window as he left almost immediately after we did. The next day at work, I told my coworkers about it, and they thought it was odd, but none of us really thought anything of it. I only had to work a morning shift that day and had plans to grab lunch with my best friend at our favorite restaurant. I am pretty sure my stalker waited outside of my work until I left and followed me to the restaurant, because I had only been there long enough to set my purse down, and he walked through the door. I pretended I didn't see him and sat with my friend. I alerted her to his presence and sat with my back to him. She told me he kept looking at me repeatedly. When we were almost done with our meal, he gets up from his table and walks towards the bathrooms, passing our table in the process. He acts surprised and is all, 2M Tuesday. I didn't see you there. This is so funny that we've run into each other again. I laugh nervously and he goes back to his table, only to return once more. He tells me he has something to give me and hands me a poetry book by him. I say thank you and that he really didn't have to do that. He says it's fine and he just had an extra in his bag, and when he saw me he figured I might want it. He then left the restaurant. I open it and he has written in black calligraphy on the inside cover. It is a message to me saying something along the lines of that he was praying for me. I decide it was sweet, but feel a little creeped out. The next day at work I tell my coworkers and they begin to feel wary about the situation. They are all much older than me, with the exception of my best friend. They tell my boss, and having dealt with previous creepy customers in the past, he asked my coworkers to hide me in the back room when they saw him coming and to deal with him themselves. This angered the stalker, and he would demand to know when I would be working next. When he realized I wasn't going to be at work, he didn't come in the rest of the week. That weekend, I was out to lunch again with a different friend. Who shows up minutes after I do? My stalker. My friend and I order our food and go find a seat. I tell her about the situation. The stalker hasn't ordered any food and is just sitting at a table, watching me. We go almost the entire meal without him confronting me. However, right as we have finished eating and are about to leave, he goes and orders food and once again, pretends he hasn't seen me and fakes casually running into me. He asks if he can sit with us. My friend explains we are about to leave. He grows upset and says it won't take long. He spends the entire time asking me what I thought of his book. I hadn't had time to look at it yet and I decide to be honest and tell him. He gets very upset. I text an SOS to a friend to call me and I pretend she is my mom and needs me to come home. The next time I work, I tell my boss about the latest run-in, and they grow concerned. My boss decides to transfer me to a different store for a while. He owned 3, and we all took turns at the different stores, but sometimes he would leave employees at a specific one for a bit. My stalker comes into my old store and asks where I am. A new employee foolishly tells him that I have been transferred and he asks which store I'm at. Luckily, the employee didn't know. This didn't stop my stalker, however. He decided to drive to every single franchise of my store within 45 minutes of the first store. Eventually he drove to the 3rd store my boss owns and asked if I was there. This freaked out my other coworkers and they called my boss and told me that some man was looking for me. My boss proceeded to call the manager at the new store and told him to hide me immediately because the stalker was probably on his way. They hid me in a spacious closet in the back room because our back room was slightly exposed. Sure enough, my stalker shows up and asks for me by name. They say I'm not there and he gets upset and says he knows I'm there. We assume he saw my car. They insist that I am not and ask if he needs any help. He says no, but proceeds to pretend to browse our limited merchandise for about 20 minutes, waiting for me to come out. When he finally left, I was terrified. I didn't see my stalker for quite some time. I was thinking he forgot about me and we all felt that things were back to normal. I went back to my old store and was working one day after school. It was a slow shift, so it was just me and another coworker. My coworker had to go to the bathroom, so it was just myself in the front room. My stalker walks in the door shortly after my coworker heads to the back. He acts very excited to see me and is carrying a bunch of stuff in his hands. My workplace also ships things, so I assumed he needed me to pack and ship the items. I asked if this was the case and he replies, "Oh no. These are for you. It's a present." He had brought me a really strange collection of items. The first was a wooden carrier type thing. Inside of it was a velvet bag that held 3 multicolored huge gaudy rings, 3 women's scarves, and a faceless odd doll made out of twine and woven basket material. The second gift was a wooden scroll-top CD case filled with about 50 CDs. All of them were terrible folk, nature sound albums and odd live renditions of songs from some radio show from a different state. The third part of his gift was a giant plastic bag filled with about 20 or so more of these CDs, as well as 14 mixed CDs he had made for me. I had no idea how to react. He claimed this was a graduation present for me. I don't know how he knew I had just graduated that weekend. When my coworker left the bathroom and came back to the front, my stalker immediately said goodbye and left the store. I was terrified and had no idea what to do with all of the stuff. It was just so odd. I ended up keeping the scroll-top CD case because it was actually pretty cool, but everything else was tossed in the garbage. I felt a little bad about that, but he had gone too far and I was quite scared. My boss moved me to a different store for the rest of the summer, where I was never left alone again, and I always had at least 2 male coworkers with me. I eventually went to college and I have not seen my stalker since.